Now let's get into one of my personal favorite picking techniques, hybrid picking. Hybrid picking plays a huge part in my overall just style. You know, it's just something I've identified with from a younger age and I've gotten so used to it, there's just no way I can not do it now. So we're gonna go over some fundamentals on what go into hybrid picking and how you can start employing it to your own styles. The most important thing is just understanding that you now have three isolated appendages, let's say, right? You have your pick, right, which is held by your thumb and your first finger. You have your middle finger and your ring finger. So these three appendages are gonna be working in tandem. I don't know of anyone who uses their pinky with hybrid picking. I'm sure they exist, but for all intents and purposes, everything that I've needed to accomplish, I've been able to do with just these three. So once you understand that you have these three things to work with, it all comes down to now assignments. We're gonna take each appendage and assign it to either a string or a group of strings. That's more or less how you get into the hang of just being able to isolate each individual moving part and then make it in a way that is comfortable and that flows. A great place to start, which is something I do for a lot of these exercises, where you just mute your strings, right? Nothing new. What we're gonna do is mute our strings so we don't have to worry about the pressure of playing something as far as our fretting hand's concerned. Because when it comes to picking techniques, it's all in our picking hand. So we're gonna focus on what our picking hand is doing. So for this exercise, what we're gonna do, I'm gonna show you how to traverse across all 6 strings just with your picking hand while muting the strings, okay? So let's say we're gonna start on the low E string, right? So we have the low E string, the A string, and the D string. 3 strings to match 3 appendages. So our pick is in charge of the low E string, right? Our middle finger is in charge of the A string, and our ring finger is in charge of the D string. And as far as what kind of plucking we're doing with our fingers, you know, I used to grow my nails out. I used to do that whole thing. I no longer do that because the maintenance just got a little out of hand, literally and figuratively. And I just got, you know, I try to get used to keeping like just enough nail to be able to kind of grab the string, right? Because I like to have a little bit of that attack, you know, so that, I mean, I'm exaggerating right now, but just so I can get a little bit of that attack so that it sort of matches like what my pick is doing. So momentarily, right, we have these isolated assignments here. We have our pick on the low E, our middle finger on the A string, and our ring finger on the D string. And in order, we're gonna go pick, middle, ring, like that. Pick, middle, ring, and just repeat that. Pick, middle, ring, pick, middle, ring. For this particular exercise, that's the order that we're gonna do. Pick, middle, ring, okay? Once we do that, we're now going to shift the assignments down a string. So we're now having our pick in charge of the A string, middle finger in charge of the D string, and our ring finger in charge of G. And we do pick, middle, ring. You can kind of see where I'm going with this, right? Then we move down another set of strings. So we're now on a new group of 3 strings, and we go pick, middle, ring. And then we bring it down one more time, and we go pick, middle, ring. So we've covered all 6 strings. We have... That's what's happening. So we're muting the strings, we're going pick, middle, ring, starting in the low E, and then we're moving it down one string at a time. Pick, middle, ring, pick, middle, ring, pick, middle, ring. When you get used to these isolations, right, with each of these appendages, and you build up speed, you can get into techniques like banjo rolling, like where, you know, where you're going, like that kind of stuff. Like that all comes with just getting comfortable with isolating each appendage. So this exercise is meant to get you started with that. So the first exercise, right, is doing it like that. Pick, middle, ring, pick, middle, ring. And then of course, once you reach the top 3 strings here, you can now move down a string and then just, you know, you can just kind of repeat this going across all 6 strings, ascending and descending. You know, that's the first exercise. The second one is gonna deal in, you're gonna be plucking both your middle and ring fingers at the same time. So you're going pick fingers. That's something that happens a lot with hybrid picking, especially like in country guitar and like in blues guitar and stuff too, where you're gonna be picking, multiple notes simultaneously. So obviously you wanna use multiple fingers, in which case it'd be these 2, and then you move it up the strings. So it's pick, fingers, pick, fingers, pick, fingers, pick, fingers. Those are more or less the two most common moves when it comes to hybrid picking. Obviously, you know, there's gonna be situations where you're using your pick and your ring finger, and maybe you bypass the middle finger or something, right? Let's say, for example, if I'm playing like an octave, right? Let's just do an octave, A octave here. So I'm doing 5th fret on the low E and then 7th fret on D. Now, instead of using my pick and my middle finger reaching down, I'm gonna stick to being used to that order of things, that natural order of things where I have my pick on the low E string and my ring fingers on the D string. So I'm doing it that way. That being said, I see guitar players will use their middle finger just if it's when you're dealing with, going back and forth between two notes, let's say. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. That's not, it's not an incorrect way to go about it. I would just say to keep it easier for you, at least in the beginning, until you establish a sense of comfort and control with this technique, that you can make little executive decisions like that. Just start off by keeping it simple and sticking with the order of things. So you're going pick, ring, right? And then if you're doing, let's say, like a 5th chord thing, where you're going 5th fret on the low E string and then 7th fret on A, which is an E note, right? So you have A and E, you have a root and a 5th, then you'd be using pick, middle, right? If you want to just walk it up the strings, you can do that, right? So you don't necessarily have to be fretting any notes. That was just to demonstrate the situation where, if you were to isolate just using, any number of those appendages instead of all three in a specific order, you can do it that way. So this exercise is just really muting the strings and going about, starting with the order, pick, middle, ring, right? Then pick fingers. And then you could do like this. If you want to do, let's say, pick, ring, where you're skipping, and then pick middle. You can do that too. There's a lot of versatility there. So this all just kind of helps you. Just all you got to do is just mute the strings and then get your picking hand ready. And then once you feel a little bit comfortable with it, at least with those first two things, right? The pick, middle, ring, and then pick fingers. You get comfortable with those, then we can start employing them to actual real world playing situations. And when that time comes, what I like to do is use just full 6-string chords, right? Like I was showing you earlier doing that banjo roll thing over a G chord, right? We can even do like open position G here. We can go pick, middle, ring, and then, pick any kind of chord you want. This is a good exercise. It's good to start with chords that encompass all 6 strings. So if you wanted to do something like a C chord that has a G in the bass, right? Just to help you navigate if you're going through an actual chord progression, that's one way you can employ this exercise. And it actually sounds kind of cool at the same time. And another thing I like to do when I'm practicing my hybrid picking is using triads. So like I did in the beginning of the video, that kind of stuff, just these triad shapes between the D, G, and the B strings, it's a great little playground because you're just isolating it to one area. You don't have to think too hard. So if we were to do this G major triad here, which is 9th fret on D, 7th fret on G, 8th fret on B, right? So we can go pick, middle, ring, we can go pick fingers, or we can go pick, ring, pick, middle, any number of ways that we can do it. We can even mess up the order, right? We can go like, that's another kind of like banjo style technique where you're going like pick, ring, middle, pick, ring, middle. So you're going kind of like in a different order. It doesn't have to be pick, middle, ring all the time, just to get you used to that rolling technique. And then of course you can mess up the order to just kind of give yourself a situation where you can play something a little bit differently. So instead of going like this, you can go like, it gets really into like the Jerry Reed style, which is fun and it's very, very challenging. But of course, this is all just to kind of lay out for you where this would logically lead to as you get more comfortable with this technique. Now, if you're trying to apply this with some lead stuff, like the chicken picking type stuff, That kind of stuff, you know, obviously hybrid picking is very important and I would say required in order to get that kind of effect, you know. So if we're doing something like a major pentatonic kind of deal, right? This would be D major pentatonic. Right? Just as an example, you know, you don't necessarily have to play this in particular. Maybe you're not even a fan of country guitar, but you want to explore this sort of technique because obviously it's interesting and it's fun, right? You can do like oblique bends, like, you know, where you're holding one note and bending another note, so you have two different notes essentially clashing. And I mean, that happens in blues too, if you're a blues guy. Or girl, you know. So you can absolutely employ those techniques. So what I like to do with those oblique bends, I like to use my fingers rather than just like pick and middle. For some reason, it just feels natural to me. If I'm on the G and the B strings, for example, right? So I'm here on 9th fret of G, 10th fret of B. 10th fret stays put while the 9th fret, you know, on the G string bends up a whole step. And I'm plucking it with these two fingers. You know, and if I'm doing something like this, something like that, where I'm going to be needing, you know, something assigned to 3 strings, right? G, B, and high E. Right? I'm having to make sure that I have something ready to go whenever I need to pick whatever I need to pick on those strings. So I have my pick assigned to the G string, my ring finger is assigned to the high E string, and then my middle finger is assigned to the B string. So they all stay at their post, you could say, right? And of course it's momentary. It's always going to be changing depending on what group of strings you're encountering, right, with what you're doing. So you can think of it like it's just this, like this position, this sort of like that's shifting depending on what you're playing. But in any given situation, you want to make sure that you have those assignments locked in so that you have, you know, you're thinking about it less and less. I've mentioned this before. It's about getting to the point where you're not thinking as much. So when you just keep it simple and then just assign things in a way that's just logical and makes sense, just get used to that when you're executing it and exercising it. And then when you're actually putting it into practice, you're not thinking about it, so you can focus more on the performance of what you're doing and the creativity of it, right? Rather than getting bogged down in the technique. So whether or not you want to do full-on banjo rolls or full-on chicken picking, you know, just to get used to hybrid picking, you can start with that exercise that we went over, where you're just muting the strings and you're just picking through the strings, you know, with your picking hand, and then doing those two different, at least do those two different ones, the pick middle ring and then the pick fingers. Because those are more likely what you're going to run into. And then if you want to take a chord progression that you like to play, you know, then just apply that and just kind of see how it sounds. And if you like it, and it's something like, ooh, that's cool, I've never done that before, I like how that sounds, then that's exactly how it had started affecting me. Like, I was playing things very differently, and then I got so used to playing them that way that I just no longer could stop. And even if it's a technique that you don't necessarily see yourself adopting too much, now you know the fundamentals and the basics of it, so you can always bust it out anytime you want to.